Section 11 of Louis Pasteur by Albert Keim and Louis Lumet, translated by Frederick Tabor Cooper. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Pamela Nagami. Chapter 7. The Sovereignty of Genius, Part 2. Pasteur was succeeded in the Académie Française by Gaston Paris, the restorer of the old national literature of France, and on the occasion of his reception the illustrious scientist J. Bertrand, who responded to his address, told some delicious anecdotes of Pasteur, his works, and his character. Already illustrious, he said, but not yet celebrated, Pasteur was appointed to express before the statue of Thénard the homage of the École Normale. He was scheduled to speak among the very last of the orators. When he arose to make his address, the crowd, weary of eloquence, continued to applaud, but had ceased to listen. Without wasting time by relating for the 15th occasion trivial anecdotes and doubtful legends, without even mentioning hydrogen peroxide, Pasteur paid Thénard the admirable tribute of dwelling only on his kindliness, recalling only his sense of justice. From the opening words, his earnest and effective phrases penetrated to the very heart, and while even the remotest hearers followed him with close attention, tears of emotion filled the eyes of all. Occasions such as that were rare. It was only when he was forced to it that Pasteur showed the brilliance of his mind. One day, at the Academy of Sciences, two contradictory spirits were raising objections unworthy of attention regarding certain discoveries. After a crushing reply, Pasteur, apostrophizing them both together, said to the one, "Do you know what you lack? You lack the power of observation." And to the other, "And you, the power of reasoning." A murmur arose. The Academy was protesting against the lack of courtesy in this form of speech. Pasteur at once interrupted himself. "The heat of the discussion carried me away," he said. "I regret my impetuosity. I beg that my colleagues will accept my sincere apology." His extreme simplicity and frankness pleased the members, when suddenly he added, "I have acknowledged myself at fault. I have willingly made my excuses. May I not be permitted to plead an extenuating circumstance? It is this, that what I said was true." And after a moment's reflection he added, "Absolutely true." A unanimous and appreciative laugh enlivened the Academy, and like sensible persons the two adversaries joined in. In accordance with Renan's expressed desire, Pasteur frequently attended the meetings of the Académie Française. He sometimes went there in the company of Monsieur Duret, the Minister of Public Instruction, who had encouraged his early efforts. For it happened that one of them lived at the École Normale in the Rue d'Ulm, and the other in the Rue de Médicis. On Thursday, when they had taken a modest fiacre to drive to the Institute, it happened to be Duret who, upon arriving at the destination, tendered a 5-franc piece to the coachman. "No change," said the latter. "Then keep the whole piece in memory of the occasion. You have driven the leading scientist of the century." Pasteur immediately put his hand in his pocket, drew out a brand new crown, and said, "Here, my friend, take this also, because you have driven the greatest minister of the Second Empire." The coachman looked somewhat bewildered, but eminently happy, while the two academicians entered the court of the Palais Mazarin, still laughing. For Pasteur, one homage succeeded another. The town of Aubenas, saved from ruin by his discoveries in regard to the disease of silkworms, presented him in May of 1882 with a work of art in which the microscope was portrayed as rendering possible the cultivation of healthy silkworms. Next it was Nîmes, which awarded him a medal for his vaccine against anthrax, and next Montpellier, where the Agricultural Society organized a solemn meeting for the purpose of thanking him for having vanquished anthrax, and to beg him to cure the rot of the phylloxera. He had become the great magician. But he had against him certain beloved brethren who either in good faith or otherwise combated the doctrine of microbes, and he had to sustain some hard contests against the doubting Peters of the Academy of Medicine. On the other hand, the German school, with Dr. Koch at its head, disputed his discoveries, going so far as to deny wholly the value of his observations. But he was so certain of the positive results he had obtained that he sent his pupil Thuillier as a delegate to Germany with virulent cultures of anthrax as well as attenuated viruses, thus carrying his experiments into the territory of the enemy. He suffered from such ill will, and from all these quarrels ceaselessly renewed. His resentment, however, was softened by the admiration he received from the great majority of scientists. The Academy of Sciences having taken the initiative, the learned society subscribed toward a medal to be presented to him, containing his profile modeled by Alphée Dubois, with this inscription: "To Louis Pasteur from his colleagues, his friends, and his admirers." This token was presented to him on the 25th of January, 1882, and Pasteur had the pleasure of seeing his old teacher, Dumas, heading the delegation, which consisted of Bozingot, Boulet, Jamin, Daubrey, Berton, Tisserand, and Devaine, and of hearing him deliver the presentation speech. Dumas, whom as an obscure youth he had listened to at the Sorbonne, leaving the lecture room, moved to the point of tears. The government did not remain insensible to the enthusiastic movement in recognition of the discoveries of Pasteur. Upon the second report by Paul Bert, the French Chambers raised Pasteur's pension to 25,000 francs, in imitation of Germany, which had accorded Jenner 250,000 francs in 1802 and 500,000 in 1807 for his vaccine against smallpox. Paul Bert's report summed up Pasteur's works as follows: "They can be classed," he wrote, "in three series. They constitute three great discoveries. The first may be formulated as follows: each fermentation is the product of the development of a special microbe. The second may be formulated: each infectious disease, or at least those which have been studied by M. Pasteur or his immediate disciples, is produced by the development of some special microbe within the organism. The third may be expressed as follows: the microbe of an infectious disease, if cultivated under certain specified conditions, becomes attenuated in respect to its harmful qualities. It has been converted from a virus into a vaccine." As practical consequences of the first discovery, M. Pasteur has given rules for the manufacture of vinegar and beer, and he has shown how beer and wine may be preserved from those secondary fermentations which turn them sour, cause l'amère, la graisse, la pousse, and prevent their transportation, and often even their preservation on the spot where they are produced. As practical consequences of the second discovery, M. Pasteur has prescribed the rules to be followed in order to protect our flocks and herds from the contamination of anthrax and our silkworms from the maladies which destroy them. On the other hand, our surgeons have succeeded under its guidance in almost completely doing away with erysipelas and other purulent infections which formerly caused the death of so many patients after operations. As practical consequences of the third discovery, M. Pasteur has prescribed the rules to be followed in order to save the horses, cattle, and sheep, and in point of fact has saved them from the disease of anthrax, which annually caused their death in France to the value of 20 million francs. Swine also are now protected from rouget, which decimated them, and the barn door fowl from the chicken cholera, which caused terrible ravages among them. And now there is every reason to hope that hydrophobia also will soon be conquered. The motion calling for an increase of the national recompense was passed unanimously, but a ceremony even dearer to Pasteur's heart than this grateful homage of an entire people was in preparation in the little town of his birth. On the 14th of July, 1883, a commemorative tablet was placed upon the house in which Pasteur was born, and M. Kempfen, director of the Beaux-Arts, who had been delegated by the government, said at its inauguration: "In the name of the government of the Republic, I salute this inscription, which recalls the fact that on the 27th of December, 1822, there was born in this little street one who was destined to become one of the greatest scientists of a century whose greatness lies in science, and one who by his admirable labors has augmented the glory of his native land and won the gratitude of all humanity." Pasteur spoke in reply, and his address reveals the great qualities of his generous heart, his extreme personal modesty, and the pride which he cherished on behalf of science alone. "Gentlemen," he said, "I am deeply moved by the honor done me by the town of Dole, but permit me, while expressing my appreciation, to utter a protest against this excess of glory. In according me a homage which is rendered only to the illustrious dead, you are usurping in advance the judgment of posterity. Will posterity ratify your decision, and ought you not, Monsieur the Mayor, have prudently advised the municipal council not to pass such a hasty resolution? But having made my protest, gentlemen, against this public proof of an admiration which I do not deserve, allow me to say that I am touched and moved to the bottom of my soul. Your sympathetic tribute has united in this commemorative tablet the two great things which have formed at once the passion and the charm of my life, my love of science and my attachment to the paternal hearth. Oh, my father and my mother! Oh, my dear lost ones who lived so modestly in this little house! It is you to whom I owe everything. Your enthusiasm, my valiant mother, you passed on to me. If I have always associated the greatness of science with the greatness of my native land, it is because I was impregnated with the sentiments which you inspired in me. And you, my dear father, whose life was as hard as your own hard craft, it is you who taught me what can be done by patience and long effort. It is you to whom I owe tenacious persistence in the daily task. Not only did you have those qualities of perseverance which result in useful lives, but you also had admiration for great men and great deeds. To aim higher and higher, to learn more and more, to seek constantly to rise, such were the things you taught me. I can still see you at the close of your laborious day, reading in the evening the account of some battle from one of the volumes of contemporary history, which recalled to your mind the glorious epoch of which you had been witness. While teaching me to read, you also took pains to teach me the greatness of France. My blessings on you both, my dear parents, for all that you have done, and let me pass on to you the homage which has today been paid to this house. Gentlemen, I thank you for having permitted me to say publicly what has been in my thoughts for 60 years. I thank you for this festival and for your welcome, and I thank the town of Dole, which never loses sight of any of her children, and which has held me in such affectionate memory. But the honors paid to his genius, whether of a private or public character, failed to turn him aside from his laborious task. At the beginning of the month of August, 1883, at which time a formidable epidemic of cholera had broken out in Egypt, he sent out a small band of his pupils, Messieurs Roux, Nocard, Strauss, and Thuillier, for the purpose of studying the frightful malady, and seeking some means of checking its ravages. Thuillier was destined to die during this scientific expedition, stricken down by the scourge in the fullness of youth and hope. He was only 26 years of age. Through the pious cares of the Pasteur Institute, his medallion has been placed upon one of the walls of the garden in testimony of his valor and devotion. The studies pursued by Pasteur and his pupils were, at this epoch, extended to every malady of microbic origin, but more particularly to hydrophobia, that terror of the country districts, and which the illustrious scientist was determined to vanquish by the combined power of genius and persistence. He was interrupted for a few weeks by the obligation of representing France at the celebration of the tricentenary of the University of Edinburgh, in company with Messieurs Carreau, Greard, de Lesseps, Guizot, and Eugène Guillaume. In London, the French delegates found a private parlour car awaiting them, thanks to Mr. Younger, a Scotch brewer, who wished in this manner to thank Pasteur for his studies in relation to beer. It was a recognition of the fine generosity of the French savant, who had enriched commerce and manufactures to the extent of millions, while refusing to retain anything for himself. And that is one of the brightest sides of the glory of France. End of Section 11.